we got to 23. I think we left it at 23.
Yeah.
Second paragraph, right?
Yeah.
Yogic Direct Perceivers, yeah. So, the reason I added this here, like I mentioned earlier, this is not traditionally part of the explanation on mind, but it kind of fits in, like how Yogic Direct Perceiver is important, how you develop it, and then how you progress on the path to liberation or enlightenment. Now, this is really a crash course on just that. You can do like a whole course just on, you can do a month on just grounds and path, as they're called, or path and grounds, if you want. So the different levels that take you to enlightenment. And it's considered important because then you have a sense where you're going and how you go there. And accordingly you can adjust your behavior, kind of understand, or your practice. Understanding, well, this is where I am right now, and this is where I'm going. And although, of course, we're all interdependent, but one of the reasons for studying is to become a little bit more independent, as in like less dependent on having to ask all the time, being confused. So you actually, when you study the path, most of our study is about studying the path, like what we're going to do now. So in a sense, the study of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the implicit meaning, that is the hidden meaning of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, which means that which is not so obvious. Emptiness is obviously set forth. Form is empty, emptiness is form, etc. But implied in that is also the description of the different path. So if you study, for instance, the Heart Sutra, as explained by His Holiness in one of his books, do you remember what that's called, the book by His Holiness? There is a commentary by His Holiness. Pardon?
The Heart Essence.
The Heart Essence, yeah. So in that book, His Holiness gives a commentary on the Heart Sutra, for instance, as one of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and explains how the explicit meaning of what is emptiness. He sets forth emptiness, but then in a hidden fashion, he also says, well, this passage implies this level of the path. This passage implies that level of the path. So there's described path of accumulation, path of preparation, etc. So they can do the same in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the other Prajnaparamita Sutras. So we have that same explanation. Of course, emptiness is set forth in a way in which it's right away obvious. But even in a hidden fashion, you have the different path, the different meditations, etc. That take emptiness as their object, but not exclusively, because you also meditate on love, compassion, and so forth. And we learn this during the first 7 years. What are the different minds? What are the different awarenesses? Go into great detail. And then before we actually set out to do that, there's a whole topic on just a general outline. So that's what I'm giving you now. Like a general outline. It is, I need to warn you, it's difficult. It's not that easy. But you've heard it once, you hear it twice, and it gets easier. And it gives you a bit of a sense of what Buddhist practice actually means in the long term. Okay. Now, the second paragraph of page 23. 23, sorry. Yogic Direct Perceivers, on the other hand, only manifest in the continuums of those who have entered the Hinayana or Mahayana path. Okay, so the words Hinayana and Mahayana are not good words, but that was a few years ago when I put this together, and it's just easier if I have to say the path of the Pali tradition, the path of the Nalanda tradition. It just gets a little complicated, so I just chose those words. And Hinayana as in like foundational yana, foundational vehicle, and Mahayana as in like extensive or universal vehicle.
So Hinayana is the same like Theravada. So
Pardon?
Hinayana, it's Theravada, same.
No, I wouldn't say it's the same, because actually I think the Theravada tradition is slightly different than the Hinayana tradition set forth in the Tibetan tradition. You see, I'm trying to think. At some point I put all these reasons together why they're different. In the Theravada tradition, it doesn't I don't think it necessarily excludes working towards enlightenment. They definitely discuss this. According to friends I have who follow the Hinayana tradition, they say in the Theravada tradition there's more emphasis on self-liberation, but there's also the possibility of enlightenment, and there are certain practices. There's great emphasis on love, compassion, etc. So I think the way the Tibetans set forth the Hinayana tradition, they set it forth as the foundation for the Mahayana, right? As like the Buddha, of course, taught many different ways how to get to liberation, as in like many different ways, which means to different people he's taught it slightly differently. So what is set forth in the Tibetan tradition is like the Mahayana tradition they have in Tibet, that has been brought to Tibet. That's a specific one. It's slightly different again from Vietnam, from from Japan, from other Mahayana traditions, like slightly different techniques, etc. And the foundation here being the Hinayana. They say Hinayana, if there was some practitioner who only followed the Hinayana, this tradition that is the foundation for the Mahayana, as it's prevalent in the Tibetan tradition. So if someone followed only that tradition, whether there were really people now that do that, it's not the point. Maybe at the time of the Buddha. But the Theravada tradition, I think, is different. It's not the same. Slight different emphasis. So this is the Tibetan tradition. I mean, when I say Tibetan tradition, it seems like it's made up. There are many lineages. If you think that the Buddha, when he taught, he didn't set forth a system, like systemized right from the beginning. He taught different people according to their predisposition, their needs, their interests, and each person got a different teaching. Okay? And then only later on those teachings were compiled and then organized and kind of like, oh, this is this teaching, this is that. And so many different techniques were set forth. And then these different techniques, they were passed on in different lineages. So you have different types of teaching. So here this is strictly the Tibetan tradition, the Hinayana version that was part of their lineage, as well as the Mahayana. Okay. So it's very appropriate to call it Theravada tradition versus Hinayana. Okay. So a Yogic Direct Perceiver, on the other side, only manifests in the continuum of those who have entered the Hinayana or Mahayana path. Is that true? Well, unit of karma binding and special insight you have in other traditions, of course, in other Hindu traditions. But a direct perceiver, in particular with regard to emptiness. So I'm trying to think, are there direct perceivers? Definitely the one here with emptiness.
It's only here.
No, it's definitely because the definition says in the continuum of an Arya being. And an Arya being means a person who's realized selflessness. And in the Hindu traditions, there's no emphasis on selflessness, for instance. So here we're talking specifically about a particular type, okay, with regard to objects such as subtle empowerment, and they're just different objects that are not asserted in other traditions. Of course, union of karma binding and special insight you find in many of the Hindu traditions.
This is called shunyata in Vedanta.
Shunyata, yeah. But shunyata in the Vedanta tradition may not be the same as in the Buddhist tradition.
The way of explanation is very different.
Yeah, so it just may refer to something slightly differently. Yeah, something slightly different. Okay. Anyway, so Yogic Direct Perceiver, on the other hand, only manifests in the continuums of those who have entered the Hinayana or Mahayana path. So, very specific, a particular type of Yogic Direct Perceiver. They are described as direct perceivers that directly realize a subtle, that is hidden phenomenon in dependence on its empowering condition, a meditative stabilization that is a union of calm abiding and special insight. So it's the empowering, it's that which gives rise to it. It's that main cause that gives rise to such a yogic direct perceiver. The meaning of a meditative stabilization that is a union of calm abiding and special insight is the following. A meditative stabilization refers to the mental factor or mental function of concentration. We all possess the mental factor of concentration. I already explained this to some degree, but here Going over it again, it's slightly different. Refers to the mental factor or mental function of concentration. We all possess the mental factor of concentration. We all have some degree of concentration, which then allows us to focus single-pointedly on, for instance, reading a book, watching a movie, or following a conversation. Right? That makes sense. We all have a certain degree of concentration. However, our concentration is usually short-lived, for we are easily distracted. Therefore, the Buddha describes various meditational techniques that help us to enhance our concentration. So concentration is one of the virtuous mental factors, and it's just a matter of...
It's object to certain.
Object is certain. Sorry, it's one of the... Oh, it's pliancy, yeah. So it's one of the object ascertaining mental factors, and it's just something we basically all possess, but then we can expound on that. For instance, some of the virtues, we don't have love, compassion, and so forth. Of the 11 virtuous states, love, compassion are not there. Oh, you also mentioned letting go. She mentioned as one of the mental factors, letting go. It could be virtuous or it could be non-virtuous, right? Letting go of something positive is a non-virtuous mind. Letting go of something negative is a...
So it'd be changeable?
It's a kind of a changeable one, right? You could add that. You came forward in the break and I forgot to mention it. So there are other mental factors. Like I said, they're not exclusive. It's not like these are the only mental factors. In fact, the Buddha talks about 84,000 different afflictions. No, I don't know whether that's 84,000. There's a tradition in which 84,000 is just a huge number, like 100, like the 100 deities of Tushita. There's like a practice, not this Tushita, but there's like a practice of the 100 deities of Ganden, if you like. And 100 here doesn't necessarily mean exactly 100, so it can just mean a large number. 1,000 can just mean a large number. So 84,000 same. All right. So the meaning of... All right. Therefore, the Buddha describes various meditational techniques that help us to enhance our concentration. Concentration that has been enhanced in dependence on such meditational techniques is known as meditative stabilization. So they use a different word to describe not just concentration, but a concentration that has been enhanced through meditation, so a meditative stabilization, mental stabilization. If we achieve a meditative stabilization that is able to focus effortlessly on an internal object, internal in the sense it's an object of our mental consciousness. So you visualize a Buddha, for instance, or you focus on the breathing, which is an internal object, as in like internal to the body. If you're able to focus on an object effortlessly, without distraction, for at least 4 hours. So then they say without effort, but very stable and intense and clear. So like, if you can hold the object for like a second, you can do that for 4 hours. That's the kind of measurement. But of course, I don't know why 4 hours, and that's probably seen, if you can do it for 4 hours, you can do the rest. What comes after? If you can't do that, you can't do the rest. I guess that's why 4 hours. While obtaining a special pliancy, a serviceability of body and mind, we attain what is called calm abiding. So this special pliancy is important. Such calm abiding is newly obtained by settling our mind one-pointedly on an internal object, such as the image of the movement of the breath, the image of the body of the Buddha, etc. Hidden phenomena, such as emptiness, subtle impermanence, etc., are not appropriate focal objects for the initial cultivation of calm abiding, because they require intense analysis and are too distractive. So they're not advised as initially starting off with these objects, because we'll just be more distracted. They're rather taken to mind for the first time by analytical awarenesses, and subsequently newly realized by an inferential cognizer that arises in dependence on such analytical meditation. So before you focus, you do your calm abiding with a different object. So at times you practice calm abiding, at times you practice emptiness. Now here, to enter one of the paths, it doesn't mean you have to realize emptiness, but sooner or later, as will be explained, you will have to realize what emptiness means. And once you do realize, once you do understand that, that's again okay. Now you need to develop calm abiding. Because the mind that realizes emptiness, that is your tool now. That is the mind that can remove all the obscurations to liberation or enlightenment. However, it can only do together with calm abiding. Okay, so with calm abiding, you practice that separately. And then on another occasion, you think about emptiness, you meditate, you engage in analytical meditation, and eventually you also apply reasoning to come to first an inferential understanding. Right? Okay. The next step is then to combine the stable mind of calm abiding with the analytical mind that realizes a hidden phenomenon such as emptiness. Okay? So previously, you may have realized emptiness. Now, for the first time, independence on reasoning, you infer the existence of emptiness, you inferentially realized it, and now you bring the two together. Realization of emptiness and your stable mind of calm abiding. During the initial part of this phase, stabilizing meditation, that is calm abiding, and analytical meditation are harmonized by alternating from one to the other. For too much concentration would disrupt the process of analysis, while too much analysis would reduce the factor of stability. Does that make sense? Right? We can all imagine that in our own cases we have other examples where that is true. However, through repeated and prolonged alternation of calm abiding and analysis, we are eventually able to combine the mental factor of calm abiding, that is concentration, really in its enhanced form, with the mental factor of analytical wisdom. Thus, we attain the meditative stabilization that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, taking a hidden phenomenon as the object. So, emptiness as an example. This means that calm abiding and the analytical wisdom now operate parallel at the same time. They have become concomitant mental factors. Okay, they're associated with each other. They support each other. They rise at the same time, and they have the 5 similarities that we mentioned before. With equal power, they operate parallel at the same time with equal power, one assisting the other. They are concomitant mental factors, which will be explained below, well, it was already explained, and realize the same object. This enables the practitioner to gain a deep, clear, and intense realization, free from mental destruction and mental sinking. So free from sluggishness as well as excitement. The function and significance of yogic direct perceivers becomes clear when presenting the gradual attainment of a yogic direct perceiver that directly realizes emptiness. Therefore, what follows is an extensive explanation of the Hinayana and Mahayana 5 paths. So you have the 5 Hinayana path and the 5 Mahayana path. Since yogic direct perceivers are path, so path just means path consciousnesses. They're described as path because liberation, the analogy of liberation is that of a goal, right? And so to reach a goal in everyday life, well, you need a road, a path that takes you there. So paths are really just mental consciousnesses that lead you, that take you closer to your goal of liberation or full enlightenment. So since yogic direct perceivers are path, one first needs to enter the Hinayana or Mahayana path before one can cultivate yogic direct perceivers. Both Hinayana and Mahayana path are 5-fold. And then there's a list of them here. Arhats. It's Aryas. That's wrong. Arhats. I wrote here. If you look at this little chart thing, it's not Hinayana Arhats, but Hinayana Aryas.
Where?
On page 25, the 5 Hinayana path. So Hinayana path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing. Right? Actually, those two. It should only be those two. The brackets kind of got a little bit switched around. This was like when this text was printed. It was actually printed for a course I taught in Israel, so you can see at the back of the page it says in Hebrew, Dharma, friend of Israel. That's still in there. I sent it on to Toshita. I think they didn't notice that. And then this happened when it was ready, it was prepared for printing. Now when I correct the text, you'll have the chart that is, it won't be in this format, it'll be A4 pages. But that doesn't matter, does it? and this chart will be adjusted. So the Hinayana path of accumulation and preparation, those two are mental continuum. Now I get it. Because the brackets are all over the place. Alright, so mental consciousness is in the continuums of Hinayana trainees. Those should be the first 4. And then there's only one, the Hinayana path of no more learning. That is a mental consciousness in the continuum of Hinayana Arhats. But if you take the first 2 and you put those 2 together, you talk about mental consciousnesses in the continuum of Hinayana ordinary trainees. And then the last 3, they are Aryas. So if you want to know the difference between an Arya and a non-Arya, the first 2 paths are non-Arya path, the last 3 are Arya path. You're an Arya once you reach the path of seeing, in other words. Because on the path of seeing, you directly see emptiness, you directly realize emptiness. That's why it's called path of seeing. Okay? And then from the first to the 4th, you're an Hinayana trainee, and on the 5th, you are what is called a Hinayana foe destroyer, or an Arhat. An Arhat just means foe destroyer. Okay?
Arya or Arha?
No, Arhat. Arhat means foe destroyer. Arya means someone who's supreme. So supreme only from the perspective of having realized emptiness directly. So the first 2 paths, Hinayana path of accumulation and preparation, you haven't realized emptiness directly yet. So you're not yet called an Arya. From the path of seeing onwards to the path of no more learning, you're an Arya. But only on the path of no more learning, you're an Arhat. Does that make sense? Yes. It's just if you just note it down and then look at it, later on it'll become clear. So from the path of seeing onwards, you're an Arya. And on the 5th path, from the 5th path onwards, you're an Arhat. Okay? Arya, Arhat. So 3, 4, 5, you're an Arya. Once you're an Arya. Well, we won't lose that. Once an Arya, always an Arya. Once an Arhat, always an Arhat. But these are different levels, and only on the 5th level you become an Arhat, but on the 3rd level you already become an Arya. Okay? And then the same is true for the 5th Mahayana path. You see, again, it's all over the place. Here it's like on the 3rd level, again, you become an Arya. And then on the 5th level, you're now a Mahayana Arhat, that is a Buddha. Okay? Yeah. So when I adjust this, I'll try to make it a little bit, I'll try to make that a little bit clearer, what is what. And it'll be explained in what follows. Alright, so the Hinayana path of accumulation. So to enter the Hinayana path, they talk about entering the Hinayana path. It's a really weird way of speaking. You never say you enter a path in everyday life, right? You step onto a path. You wouldn't say you enter into a path. But if a path is a consciousness, you also don't say I enter into a consciousness. So that's bizarre, but in Tibetan you literally say you enter the path. So what does that mean? You step onto the path, the Mahayana path, or the Hinayana path. Or in other words, you develop one of those paths. One of your minds now becomes this kind of path. That's what it means. Yeah?
We say state of mind.
It's a state of mind. It's a state of mind. A path is a state of mind. It's a particular kind of mind that is called path. And the vocabulary is just really odd. You enter, you step onto... But to say you step onto the path, which is one of your own minds, that's odd. So you develop a path in your mind, in your continuum. Like in your mental continuum, you develop a particular type of mind that can now be called a path. That would work better. But the words that are used is like you enter a path, yes?
They use the stream as well, but that may be Pali.
Stream?
Entering the stream entry.
No, but the stream entry is something different. On the path of seeing... That is also explained in this tradition, like a stream enterer, a once returner, a never returner, and a foe destroyer. Those levels are described, but that happens on the path of seeing. Once you realize emptiness directly, you're called a stream enterer. I haven't mentioned this here because it gets too complicated, but yes, in the Pali tradition, those stages are emphasized more. Okay. Now, Hinayana path of accumulation. How do you generate this type of mind that can now be called the Hinayana path of accumulation? which means once you develop that, you enter the Hinayana path. You have achieved a Hinayana path, the first path. Okay? So it's just that language, you enter the path. Yeah, I get that. It takes a while to get used to it. It's like you enter a path, it's like the path sounds like a room.
Sounds like it has a gate.
Pardon?
Sounds like it has a gate.
There is a gate. Because we talk about the entryway into the Mahayana path. There's an entryway. That's why this language, there's like a particular mind that is the entryway. Okay, they actually talk about it. Jugo. Juk means to enter, go means door. The entry door, the entryway. Yes, I'm glad you bring it up. Yeah. The criterion or the entryway for entering the Hinayana path, that is the Hinayana path of accumulation, is the generation of the sincere and spontaneous aspiration to eliminate the afflictive obstructions in order to overcome cyclic existence and become an arhat. That is called renunciation. What is renunciation? It's an English word we've taken possibly from Christianity, right? Okay, so let go of the meaning in Christianity. I don't even know what that means in Christianity. Just kind of letting go of your coarsest desires, I guess. But really, in Tibetan, it has the connotation of Nianjung, as in like to definitely want to emerge. You definitely want to emerge. You want to get out of your limited state right now. So what does that mean? It means so many different things. You've all heard about the 3 types of suffering, right? Suffering of suffering, suffering of change, pervasive suffering, right? So, suffering of suffering is the ordinary suffering. We all have renunciation for suffering of suffering. We all renounce, we all want to get out of it, so no big deal. But we don't want to overcome suffering of change. Suffering of change is our ordinary happiness. It's the only happiness we know. That is called suffering of change, because if you don't change the object of that happiness, it will inevitably change into suffering. Okay? Anything you do, whatever gives you happiness, spending time with your friends, well, if you don't stop doing it, you'll suffer. It's like, I usually ask when I teach an introduction course, what makes you really happy? Watching a movie. Okay, so 1 hour, 5 hour, 2 days, 10 days. Imagine, I make you watch a movie for 10 days. Wow, you go crazy. Or like if you say, be with a friend. Take a walk in the forest with a friend. Okay, 1 hour, 2 hour, 5 hour, 10 hours, 3 days, 4 days. Whoa. If that's really the nature of happiness, your happiness should become greater as you keep walking. Right? If that's in the nature of happiness, being with a friend, talking, sleeping, eating, whatever. But of course, we have to change from one happiness to the other, from one object to the other, because the happiness only lasts for that long. So we have to switch all the time, because those things are not in the nature of happiness. They only briefly stop a worse state of suffering, right? And then slowly, it's like a short release from something worse, okay? So like if you're in the sun, you get too hot. Or if you're with your friend, you get bored. Now you need to leave and go somewhere else and eat something. Okay, so that is like a relief from the pain of suffering, the pain of hunger, and the pain of having listened to your friend all the time. That has arisen. So there's a short relief. And then slowly that again turns into suffering. You have to stop eating. Okay, now you need to drink, because you have the suffering of thirst and having eaten too much. Now you drink, short relief from the suffering of having eaten too much and so forth. Now you have to lie down because you've walked too much, right? Now, okay, short relief from that, but you have to get up because your back hurts or whatever. You get bored. Now you have to get up, okay? Then you have to watch a movie because you're bored. Okay, so it's like constantly a worse suffering is about to arise, and just to make sure it dies down, we need to experience something. Okay, so that's what we call happiness. That's happiness. Right? Okay, and it's even expressed in you sitting here. Like I usually give this example. I tell you, I'll make a video of you sitting here, and then I play it very fast, and we're like, right? Because even when we're sitting there, we can't be in one position. Sooner or later we're in pain. Stretch my leg, bend my legs. Bend to the right, bend to the left. Back straight, back bent. Looking up, looking down. Alright, right? So it's just, that's what our life is like. Because of our misapprehension of reality, the suffering lurks. Suffering is right there because we're always discontent. We always feel incomplete. We're always lacking something. There's never contentment. And since we crave that, now we're looking for it in different things, but those things cannot provide us this contentment we're looking for, actually just because of our mind, because of our misperception of reality. No way we can find it. We can only find a short relief, and that's called happiness. That's called happiness. Isn't that bizarre? We totally shortchange. Is that a good word? Shortchange ourselves. Instead of working towards a lasting happiness, we work towards these short-term happinesses. Always somehow believing this time that's the jackpot. If am I with this person, I'll be really happy. If I get that job, I'll be really happy. If I buy this house, I'll be really happy. But of course, it's a short time. We enjoy that. Right? Of course, also back and forth, we need to change all the time, but maybe for some time it gives us some satisfaction. But since we're in samsara, the house breaks down and we get bored with it. And we want a bigger house now. Or we decide yellow was the wrong color. We want it blue now, so we need to paint it blue. So we're so busy. We can never sit still. And that is called the suffering of change. And then having this mind and body in the first place. A mind and body having samsara, that's pervasive suffering. That's samsara itself, our mind and body, which has the potential to suffer with it. It's almost like in the nature of this, because of our, as he said, our misperception of reality. Right? That's it. That's samsara. So now you want to get out of that. Understanding that is not... My mind can experience so much more. Once you understand that, you wish to overcome that. You renounce that. This attachment towards this, you let it go, and instead you wish to become liberated. Okay? Just a sense of letting go. Of course, not totally letting go, because you can't do that yet. You have to have a Yogic Direct Perceiver, which you are still to develop, haven't cultivated it. But this Yogic Direct Perceiver here is a means towards liberation. Before you develop the means to become liberated, you first need to wish to be liberated. That's the first step. You really want to be liberated. You understand what liberation is all about. You understand the shortcomings of our situation right now, and now you want to get out of it. Right? First step to anything is the wish. If you want to go somewhere, it's before you can take the first step, you wish to go there. Does that make sense? That idea? And that is the entryway. That is described as the entryway to the Hinayana Path. Or the criterion, that's the more technical term they would use in English, but it's really called the entryway. Such aspiration can only arise after intense and prolonged contemplation of the suffering nature of our existence. It's not about being pessimistic, it's about being realistic. Right? We can pretend that our life is full of happiness. Okay, and then Buddhism is a little painful because we've been in denial about what our life really is like. Okay, right? I mean, gosh, before I met Buddhism, it's like amazing what I thought happiness was. The stuff I was running after, unbelievable. Put so much time and effort in that. And I never got what I wanted, and I couldn't figure out why. Alright. Once Hinayana practitioners have cultivated the path of accumulation, so once they've accumulated that type of mind, once that aspiration is there, it's effortless, it's there. You can lose it, of course, you can lose it again, but at some point it becomes so stable, you won't lose it. It's really stable. It's like it's become so much part of you that you won't lose it. So once Hinayana practitioners have cultivated the path of accumulation, so now this mind is in their continuum and they move on from there to develop other minds, they need to accumulate sufficient merit and wisdom to be able to proceed. Now they need to accumulate a lot of positive potential, right? That enables them to find the opportunities to practice, to learn, and continue to develop their mind. So just the wish towards becoming liberated, the wish to become liberated, that aspiration is not enough. Now you need to create the causes and conditions to get to liberation, basically. And those are all mental. So you need to accumulate merit, as in like emotional states that benefit you, wisdom that are rational understandings, certain realizations with regard to reality that also take you on, that move you on, that like kind of are causes and conditions that help you to move on, mentally move on, and not be stuck. Okay, this is the reason for calling this path the path of accumulation. So you accumulate lots of causes and conditions now to be able to move on. Just to give you the reason for calling it accumulation. Furthermore, practitioners who are now on what's called the path of accumulation, they've reached that path, or they have attained it in their mental continuum, now they have to generate an inferential cognizer realizing the emptiness of intrinsic existence. Now you need to realize, in order to move on, that is to move to the path of preparation, and it will become obvious in a moment why you can only move on to the path of preparation once you realize emptiness. Well, you must have realized already emptiness. On the path of preparation, you must have realized emptiness. So you realize it now on the path of accumulation. You start now on the path of accumulation. So previously, anyway, I'll mention that later. So they have to now generate an inferential cognizer realizing the emptiness of intrinsic existence. They have to now realize emptiness, and since directly is not an option, you can't for the first time realize emptiness directly, the only other option would be independence on a correct reason. That's the only other option, because it's a slightly hidden phenomenon. So, in other words, unless practitioner realized emptiness before they... So, it's also possible. You can also realize emptiness before you enter the Hinayana path. That's possible. Right? If you realize emptiness, you may have already developed an interest. You're not interested in liberation or enlightenment, but you understood emptiness. Possible. Right? That's a possibility. So... In other words, therefore, unless practitioners realize emptiness before they enter the path of accumulation, they must now, while they're on that path, reflect on the various reasons that establish the ultimate nature of reality until they're able to infer the lack of intrinsic existence of phenomena and thereby newly, conceptually realize the emptiness. That is, realize emptiness with an inferential cognizer. So, you may have done that before, okay? For some reason, you didn't generate the wish to become liberated yet. You first generate understanding of emptiness, and then you generate the wish to be liberated, and that means now you enter the path of accumulation, having already realized emptiness. But if you first enter the path of accumulation through the entryway of aspiring to become liberated, then you have to realize emptiness now. You have to pay attention to that and train yourself. Otherwise you cannot move on to the next level. Furthermore, on top of that, on top of realizing emptiness on that path, practitioner must develop calm abiding, a special concentration that is able to focus uninterruptedly on an internal object with calmness, clarity, and intensity for at least 4 hours, as was explained before. That you also need to develop. Following that, calm abiding, focusing on, for instance, the image of the body of the Buddha, and the analytical meditation, that is the conceptual consciousness realizing emptiness, are harmonized, alternating from one to the other. This I wrote at a different time. I copy and pasted it, so it kind of seems a little odd. I've just explained it. But at least said as mentioned before, or as was described before, right? It seems to be like repeating it. But anyway, so you get that here at this point now you're practicing this process that was mentioned before of alternating calm abiding and special insight with regard to emptiness. And then the criterion for entering the Hinayana path of preparation is when practitioners newly attain that union of calm abiding and special insight. That is the criterion for the path of preparation. Okay? So, on the path of accumulation, you enter that path because you want to become liberated. You're sincere in your aspiration. It's a spontaneous aspiration that arises spontaneously and that now drives all your actions. That's the kind of aspiration we're talking about. It's not just, wish once a week. Oh, wouldn't it be nice kind of thing. No. It's like an aspiration that now drives your every action. Okay? And it's there, it's always in the back of your mind in a sense. Like any action is directed towards that goal. And you don't do anything but just focus on that. So, but since you understand, and it comes along with a great understanding of the path, therefore you know, okay, I have this aspiration, I'm on the path of accumulation, now I need to develop a union of calm abiding and special insight. Because just an understanding of emptiness, which I still need to develop, that itself is not enough. I need to bring it together with a certain degree of focus. And that's what they set out to do. They train themselves in calm abiding, they train themselves in the understanding of emptiness. Unless they've done that already before they entered the Hinayana path, right? But let's assume they haven't, and so they do it now. Okay. Alright, so the criterion for entering is therefore when practitioners newly attain a meditative stabilization that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, taking emptiness as the object. The union refers to two awarenesses, calm abiding and special insight, arising simultaneously in union as concomitant mental factors, both realizing emptiness. Okay, again as we explained before. This means that calm abiding, the one-pointed awareness realizing emptiness, and special insight, the thorough discrimination of or discernment of emptiness, now operate parallel at the same time with equal power, one assisting the other. Oh, gosh, if I'd read that. Because I'm just repeating myself. That was what I said before. I kind of copy-pasted it from something else I wrote. Sorry. That's why I need to really work on this text. However, this meditative stabilization, that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, is a conceptual consciousness. It's not yet a direct perceiver. It's just conceptual. And therefore this path, unable to act as a direct antidote to any of the afflictive obstructions. When practitioners arise from the realize, so that means therefore it's a preparation for the path of seeing. When you realize, when that union directly realizes. And it's explained in the next paragraph. So why is it called path of preparation? Because you have that union of calm abiding. In other words, you have a great degree of stability together with your understanding of emptiness. You've brought those two together. But it is still conceptual. And that is in preparation to the next level, where you have that great degree of stability plus an understanding of emptiness. But due to your familiarity with the object of emptiness, you now realize it directly. That is the first moment of the path of seeing. Okay? But on the Hinayana path of preparation, not only do you focus on emptiness, you also meditate on love, compassion. Here it says, when you arise from the realization of emptiness, from that mind that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, you also engage in the accumulation of merit by practicing love, compassion, generosity, and so forth. Now you need to imagine this practically, what does that look like? There's a guy called John who's now on the path of accumulation. I mean, John may even go to work, right? John may live a life like everyone else, but no one knows, because you don't announce your Dharma practice. You don't talk about it usually, right? If you can at all avoid it, you don't talk about what you do. You don't need to do that, but you need to be very strong, mentally very strong. That at the outside you're just an ordinary person. In fact, you're so humble, you don't want anyone to pay attention to you. You don't want to be famous and all be distracted and stuff. You just want to do your thing. Of course, it may also help if you maybe have a lot of time to just meditate, especially when you meditate on calm abiding. Being in an office can be a little bit disruptive. So maybe you take some time off until you have calm abiding. You know how long it takes to generate calm abiding? If you have pure moral conduct, they say it takes 6 months. Really? Yes. But only for a really good practitioner.
Adam Wallace talks about it, and it's very funny, I'm 3 months away, and when he was here many years ago, and it's there's a stop, it's it's supposed to be like this, but
yes.
Very interesting, because he went with this mind.
Yeah.
And after he had the date on which he will achieve Shamatha.
That was probably the obstacle he faced, having that date. Because I know of some Tibetans, when His Holiness announced that they went and did meditation, His Holiness said about them, they achieved calm abiding in 6 months. So that these practitioners, they have a lot of merit, they're very determined. They don't check 6 months or not. That could already be an obstacle, right? I mean, that's just our mind, how it works. Pardon?
I still think that probably he achieved it
Huh?
I still think that probably he achieved it. Maybe not in 6 months, but maybe in
Who knows?
years.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. I mean, who can tell? Who cares? I mean, in the end, we don't know. I mean, not who cares. I mean, if he really did, that'd be very inspirational. But we don't know in actuality. And we can basically, you can usually tell by the degree of calmness. Do they get easily irritated by, someone saying something or not? So it's pretty easy to check. But of course, we don't necessarily have the opportunity. And if we did, that's amazing. Because there are not many people at this day and age. It's very difficult to find people like that. But there are definitely some. So they definitely have calm abiding. And 6 months is when you have all the causes and conditions, and then it may take longer. You may face obstacles, then you have to purify. But that's all right, even if it takes you 3 years, or even if it takes you a lifetime. In the whole, from the whole perspective, it's nothing. One lifetime is not long. For us, it is, especially since we're so used to just believing in one lifetime. But if you understand that there are many lifetimes, it's a very short time. Anyway, the point is here that you generate calm abiding, and all the other activities, well, it takes time. It may take you a month, it may take you years. I don't know how long it can stretch. They say that from the first path of the Hinayana path of accumulation to becoming liberated, I think the shortest they say is 3 lifetimes. 3 lifetimes, the shortest.
How can you know that you will always remember that you will pick it up from where you left it?
That is part of the practice, to make very strong prayers. May I be born in an environment where these imprints can be triggered. This is a good point. It's a very good point, because this explains why there's sometimes very high lamas who've had, you can trace back in their previous life, they were this great practitioner, and the one before, and the one before. And in this life, they're like, where's the Lama? So not every Rinpoche is really that reincarnation. That also needs to be said. Sometimes the person is recognized as a reincarnation because it's beneficial to the disciples, but it doesn't have to be the actual reincarnation. Yeah, it's not always. So the lamas, my teacher Geshema talks about this many times. Not all the lamas, not all the reincarnated lamas are really the reincarnations.
So they're a
No, it's not it's oftentimes done purposely. Sometimes it's a mistake. I mean, some Rinpoches are not Rinpoches. Their parents were super ambitious, and they kind of claim they're Rinpoches. How do you prove someone is not? Politically, for instance. Yeah, or not just to have all the benefits in terms of reputation, etc. That is rare, but you can check. Is this an ordinary person, or do they... You can oftentimes, they're not ordinary if you hang out with them. I mean, Second Century Rinpoche, the other day he was here. He definitely is not ordinary. He seems very ordinary, but the way he touches us when he teaches is very different from just an ordinary person. So that's the way we can check. Anyway, I think in most cases they are the reincarnation. I'm saying in some cases they don't have to be. So this is also important. And the Tibetans are very good at that. They know there's a Rinpoche and there's a Rinpoche. Right? I mean, they are respectful, yes, because you never know. But if that person kind of behaves in a way that they don't find inappropriate, they're respectful, but they kind of distance themselves emotionally and spiritually. Right? They're never disrespectful, but they're just, okay, all right. No, I'm not going to listen so much to that person, maybe to someone else. Okay? So there's a very skillful way without openly going, oh, this is a little... No, they don't criticize people in that. They're not confrontational in that way anyway. Okay, so therefore, with regard to this practice, you can actually be stuck, as in 1 or 2 lifetimes. Either it's not the real reincarnation, for instance, of a Lama, or it's the actual reincarnation, but facing obstacles. So in a previous life, they may have been on the path of accumulation or path of preparation. They don't lose that, but it doesn't manifest in that life. For a whole lifetime, they just seem totally ordinary, right? And then they experience disease, etc. They don't even live very long. They die, and then the next life, it comes through. So we
can skip a life.
You skip a life, as in it's still a continuum of that person. In this case, you're not actually recognizing someone else. I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama may, for the benefit of others, recognize someone who's not the reincarnation, and the actual reincarnation doesn't want to be recognized. They want to be incognito, they want to just continue their work without being put on a pedestal. Maybe then someone else is recognized who's got enough merit for the benefit of the disciples, right? And then in the next life, only the person. That may happen. It's only for the benefit of others, so there may be some pushing and shoving around, but it comes from a good place, basically. But usually is the reincarnation, and so even in that case, there may be a Lama who manifests, or he's not fully shown his mental capacity, right? I mean, we can be like that on a certain day. Usually we're brilliant, and we have a bad day. Okay, so during that day, we don't feel good, our brilliance doesn't come, if you're like a mathematical wizard or something, and you just have a bad day, and you can't even multiply 10 by 15 or whatever, right? Could happen. So then the next day you go back to normal. I mean, just as a silly example. So like for a bad day, that is. Right, just as an example, so here a day can be equal to a lifetime. It can be a whole lifetime, and then they pick up from where they left before. Okay? But that's why it's considered to be so important to make prayers in this lifetime. May in the next life, may I pick up from where I left. May I find the Dharma again. May I find circumstances. May whatever understanding I've come to, may that come through again. Okay? So usually as children, it may not directly manifest, but then sooner or later, when a certain maturity is reached, it comes through again. Okay? So with the child, I mean, in some cases, if we read His Holiness the Dalai Lama's biography, that he was special, there's no doubt. But then when he talks about his own upbringing, he talks about more of an age of maturity, like the age of 14, he started thinking about this. The age of 16, he started thinking. So it's around this age, like when you kind of become more mature as a teenager. And again, you need the circumstances. I mean, for me, this is another reason I believe in reincarnation, actually. If you look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama's life, it's actually a pedagogical disaster. He was taken away from his parents at the age of 5. No more mom and dad. They could only visit on certain days. He was put in the care of elderly men. Very kind, yes. But his only playmates were the sweepers. Right? In the Putella, he only talks about the sweepers. They were like old guys, not much of an education. They were his playmates, because he was not supposed to play with other children. So he was put in this old building, right? This old palace, very cold building. He was trained since he was very little, and was put in this environment that I think any other child, like if you have a child in the West maybe, I mean you have therapy until the rest of your life. After you've been upbringing like that, right? I mean if you just go through it, no mom to be there to reinforce his confidence, no dad around really, it's like, and then there's all these old teachers. He wasn't beaten. It was his brother. No, his brother got the beating apparently for him. So that's why you couldn't beat the Dalai Lama. So the brother got beaten.
No, he said his teacher had a holy grip for him. Right?
Yeah. But he didn't. Yeah, but it wasn't used on him, and it was rather used on someone. And so then, of course, he didn't want his brother to be beaten. Anyway, so I mean, they did. I think every now and then that was probably kept secret. He would also get a little bit of a possible. I don't know, but that's how they educate in the monasteries sometimes, right? And we think, oh my God, it's just a disaster. And look at the result, right? Look at the result. I mean, the thing is, it wasn't all negative. And sometimes I think in the West we do away with certain techniques that may actually work. But we do away with all of them because in some extreme cases they haven't worked. But the point is, I think it didn't, like some people say, of course the Dalai Lama is special, he had a special upbringing. But it was pretty traumatic. If he talks about like his life in the Bodhala, how lonely it was at times and not having playmates and not having the same opportunities as other children. So if His Holiness the Dalai Lama hadn't trained his mind over many, many lifetimes, how could he become this very special person? Because that special training, and his brother had the same training and he didn't become that special person. Right? His brother is also a Rinpoche, Ngāra Rinpoche, and he is special in many ways. But no one knows him. Have you heard of Ngāra Rinpoche? Right? Once, yeah. You can see him in his Jeep sometimes driving through town, but you don't know he's the brother of His Holiness. But if you look closer, you can see they look alike. But so they're not, he's not as special as His Holiness. So if there weren't previous lives during which he trained continuously, then how can this come through? To me, this is another proof for past and future lives, that some of these great lamas, their upbringing is not more special. They're just like other monks, put in a monastery, put in their environment, and sometimes they get beaten, sometimes, they experience a lot of hardships. I mean, the pressure on these Rinpoches is unbelievable, right? A non-Rinpoche can behave sometimes in naughty ways. It's okay. Not a Rinpoche. No, you cannot do the same naughty things. You're in this golden cage and everyone is looking at you. And if you're not special, you break. You break. And then you may, not want to have anything to do with it, give up the Dharma. There are some cases they give up the Dharma. I'm not talking about giving back their vows. That's not necessarily a negative thing to disrobe. But there's some that totally turn away and are totally anti. So then I think anti the Dharma. So it's broken them. But I don't think it has to do with the Dharma as much as with their mental development, because there's so many great lamas. They're so amazing. And they've gone through so many hardships and still they're very special. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if you're around long enough, it seems like a fairy tale. You may not believe this. But if you're long enough around, like I had some classmates, they were Rinpoches, you could always tell they were special. They were oftentimes raised with the greatest pressure, and they stood up to it, and they were really special. Honestly, like I had 3 classmates who were Rinpoches. Very special. And one is actually one of the heads of the Kagyu tradition. Like they have different Kagyu lineages, and one is the head of it. And he's very humble. He's very intelligent, very humble, and he didn't have an easy life. Anyway, so this is to do with lamas, and this is to do with the progress, of course, on the path. Because once you reach a certain level, you can choose your rebirth. Now you can come back as a recognized Rinpoche. That's on the path of C. Okay? Alright. So if you just visualize someone who's just practicing all the time. Like you see these monks around. You see Lama Gyupa with a stick walking around, right? He's pretending he's just totally ordinary. He's totally pretending. I'm pretty sure he's not, but I've been wrong many times. The old guy. Yeah, that's right. The old guy. He's really nice, right? He doesn't come across as but I'm pretty sure he's doing great practices. But he's just manifesting in that way, just being ordinary. That is a sign of a great Lama. Of like a great practitioner. They don't go like look like charismatic and so forth necessarily. They come across like oftentimes they don't want attention. They want to do their thing, and they're like really sweet, and you don't really take them seriously, and so you leave them alone. Right? Okay. So I've met another Lama, another monk who was like so super humble that people were like, oh, he's almost too humble. And they kind of left him alone, and no one really paid attention to him. And when he died, he was in the clear light for 2 weeks. No one knew that. I told you about one of my teachers. No one knew he was special. He always pretended he was just ordinary and a little messy. And then he died and he was in the clear light. And it was like, whoa. One of the there was an abbot of a nunnery. And again, he didn't have much status and so forth. It was just a small nunnery. So he was so kind. He was so unbelievable. But not like in a way that you thought he was a great Lama. You just thought he was just this humble, nice person. And when he died, he was in the clear light, and when he burned his body, there were relics. There were these little bowls, like these little pearls. So these are like relics. High Lamas, when they die, they leave behind things. Their bodies have changed, and they leave behind little pearls in the ashes. And then they're usually shown to like His Holiness, for instance, and His Holiness reconfirms. Like it's different. Like even in Christianity, you have the people who when they die, sometimes their bodies don't degenerate. You've heard of that, right? They don't decay. Yeah, some of the, like Saint Francis and so forth. It's this incredible practice of love and compassion. It changes your body so that when you die, the body is different to an ordinary person's body. Okay, you have that in other traditions too. Anyway, so all I'm trying to say is like...
Does that have to do with the nadis being pure as well? the energy channels?
Well, it depends. Not necessarily. I guess nadi in the sense of like tantric practice purification, not necessarily. But if you generate love and compassion, you naturally purify the energy in your body. Maybe not to the degree in the tantric level, not to the same degree, because otherwise you wouldn't have to practice tantra. Just with love and compassion, you'd be able to do it. But there is a certain degree of purification. Yeah. All right, so that gives you hopefully a bit of a more of a sense that this takes time, of course, and this is just an outline which may take many lifetimes. All right, so on the path of preparation, therefore, the criterion is the union of calm abiding and special insight, taking emptiness as the object, but it's still a conceptual mind. And of course, when you have practiced that mind, when you've achieved that mind, you still have to, on other occasions, practice love, compassion, generosity, that which is called method. Right? Remember, method versus wisdom. The union of calm abiding and special insight, taking emptiness as the object, that is part of the wisdom aspect. Love, compassion, generosity is part of the method aspect, or method side of the path. Okay, now this is the path of preparation. Then, the Hinayana path of seeing. The criterion for entering the Hinayana path of seeing is the cultivation of a meditative stabilization that is union of calm abiding and special insight, and that realizes emptiness directly. So it's now, again, a mind that is combined with a certain degree of stability, that is calm abiding. But now, because you meditated on this conceptual mind again and again, the mental image, the generic image fades. It fades away. And we have really no experience of that. It's just very clear appearance of emptiness, direct appearance of emptiness. It's not by way of a generic image. Okay? Now, this is a mind, unfortunately, we really don't have experience of. But the moment you have that mind, that is called path of seeing. Should we take a break?
We can.
Is that the time now? Sure. Okay, good. Please take a break. 15 minutes, yes. And again, you can come forward if you want. All right, great. Ooh, that was a little longer than 15 minutes. Okay, great. So going back to the path of seeing. So the criteria for entering the Hinayana path of seeing is the cultivation of a meditative stabilization that is a union of calm abiding and special insight, and that realizes emptiness directly. So once you can do that, directly realize emptiness, that means you've reached the path of seeing. Now you see emptiness directly. So you see, from the path of preparation onwards, whether you move on or not, always has to do with emptiness. Okay? The first path, the entryway into that, the criterion for achieving that was the aspiration to become liberated, and for the remaining levels, it connects to some understanding of emptiness. Okay, the second was the path of preparation. It's the union of calm abiding and special insight, conceptually realizing emptiness. And now the Mahayana path of seeing, the Hinayana path of seeing, is the union of calm abiding and special insight, directly realizing emptiness. Okay. This meditative stabilization is referred to as meditative equipoise. It's called meditative equipoise. In Tibetan, it's nyamsha yeshe. It's actually, literally, yeshe means wisdom, primordial or pristine wisdom, and nyamsha is like a balanced, like an equipoise. So it's like a meditative equipoise wisdom kind of thing, right? So the word that is used is like a meditative equipoise or meditative absorption, the different words for it. So it's really just saying you're directly realize, in this case, emptiness, and the mind is totally absorbed. It's like equipoise, as in like, it's non-dual. It's totally balanced, it's non-dual. So this meditative stabilization is referred to as meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness, and as a yogic direct perceiver, directly realizing emptiness. So a lot of strange words that you may not be familiar with, but you probably have some sense after talking about it so often. To such an awareness, since it directly realizes the emptiness of all phenomena, or the ultimate nature of all phenomena, all appearances of subject and objects become inseparable, like water being poured into water. Usually when we look at an object, there's a sense, there's the observer and the object. To the mind itself, there seems to be a distance, right? There's a sense of like the observer, like there's the observing and the observed. There's almost like a distance. Okay, although we're not really aware of the mind itself, how it works and what its nature is and so forth, but there's still that sense of observing something and an object. Okay, like a distance between the two. Does that make sense? But when you realize emptiness, your mind is so absorbed in it, there's no longer a sense of perception or anything. It's just the mind is totally kind of like, what's the word? It's dived into emptiness. It's absorbed into emptiness. So water being poured into water, there's no sense of understanding something that is the object. No, it's just emptiness. To that mind, there's nothing else. That's weird to explain, but maybe sometimes we have concentrations where we totally lose sight of anything else and we just delve into it. So that, of course, is not a realization of emptiness, but maybe that's the closest of like an ordinary experience. So such an awareness, all appearances of subject and object become inseparable, like water being poured into water. So we can't differentiate between water being poured into water. In that sense, subject and object totally disappear. So the sense of something that perceives and that which is perceived, that disappears. The mind that realizes emptiness directly is a yogic direct perceiver that when it manifests in practitioner's continuums, completely removes during one meditative session the intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions. So any intellectually acquired ignorance, anger, like anger that is the result of an intellectually acquired sense of a self. Intellectually acquired anger, I was thinking, is there this type of intellectually acquired anger? And I think there is. I think...
Right.
Pardon?
Right.
Huh?
Right.
No. No. Intellectually acquired means it's a form of anger that you have developed due to reasons. It makes sense to you. For instance, if someone tells you it's good to leave out your anger, and maybe you weren't that angry, but you generated kind of anger. Like someone tells you you're suppressing your anger, and now you're trying to let your anger out. And actually, you may have suppressed a little bit, but due to that sense, you're now developing almost. You're cultivating anger. Do you know what I mean? Right? And there's some forms of possibly also psychotherapy, I'm not sure, where they tell you should leave out all these emotions, live these emotions, possibly live your anger. And of course, if it was just a case of suppressed anger and you leave it out, that's fine. But if you go into another extreme such that you start developing anger, right? I should really be angry. They're not treating me right. I should be angry. And then you develop anger as a result. That's no longer innate anger. That's intellectually acquired. Or intellectually acquired attachment. Or, of course, intellectually acquired misperceptions of reality. We've already discussed those. All those disappear. With that, you only need to... The moment you realize emptiness directly, all those intellectually acquired wrong views and the afflictions that arise from those that are either they are intellectually acquired or they are induced by an intellectually acquired misperception of reality, they're all gone for good, can no longer arise in one meditative session. That's how easy.
4 hours?
No, not 4 hours. Doesn't have to be 4 hours. When we say the calm abiding, is like you have the ability to be focused for 4 hours. That doesn't mean every time you meditate on calm abiding, that is, you allow for that mind to arise, that you need to do it for 4 hours. It depends. There's no time usually. There's no time frame given how long it takes you, right? I mean, at least you better stop before you start starving or dying of not drinking or whatever, right? What's it called? Dehydration. Exactly. I was going to say hypothermia, but no. That's something else. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? William, what did you want to say?
I was just going to say something. I was going to say something about Osho meditations.
Oh, offensive of
when
Osho.
When you like kind of...
Osho meditation.
Yeah.
What is Osho meditation? What did it do?
There's lots of different ones, but quite a lot of them are like you, almost like an actor, you like
Bring out.
step into the motion, and they say it's like you're releasing suppressed emotions, but sometimes it goes to the community, you see them like do it all the time.
Oh, so you get used to it, kind of
so
like.
you're almost training this anger, and like you see, like I'm letting out my anger again about my dad for the 50th time, and it's like, oh, okay.
He just swallowed before I laughing.
It's really interesting. Like Goenkaji comments on our show, and he didn't think that they had any meditation technique that could bring peace to the mind.
What did Goenkaji say?
He said they didn't think that he had any meditation technique that could bring peace to the mind necessarily.
That's not true. I think the dynamic meditation is the one that he's initially talking about, where people are screaming. But there's another one which is the Kundalini meditation, which is actually really good. It's about if you have emotions that are suppressed, like cellular memories, in jumping, you're actually bringing them up to the surface for release, so that you can actually analyze them the way we would through analytical meditation.
Okay.
It just depends.
This is okay, but when I stay with the community and they do these meditations every day, they're dynamic, and they do an on meditation once a week or something.
Okay.
Which is going for every single emotion, so not just happiness or joy. It's like happiness, joy, and pain, everything.
Okay.
It's just a repetition of it. It could be useful. I do actually think it's potentially useful, like once in a while.
Right, but like anyway, we're not saying that all of them. Well, who knows? But like you could probably introduce a lot of them. But the one that you mentioned in particular, where you foster anger intellectually, this is just not an innate anger, but is fostered. It's ideologically influenced or intellectually. So that would definitely be seen as a problem, and it couldn't arise again at that time, right? So that would be an example. Or generate attachment again, which is not actually there. Craving that is not there, but through an intellectual, whatever, a wrong view, you foster that.
Do we have any innate anger though? I thought we just had innate attachment to...
Oh, we have innate anger. We have innate anger.
All people are born angry, you think? I thought they were just born attached, and then from that anger could arise.
No, but I mean, when we say innate anger, it doesn't mean we're born angry. We're also not born attached.
We're attached to our bodies even as an infant.
Yeah, but the attachment is not always there. Right? It's not always there. There are times when we're not attached. No, it's a good point you're making, right? No, but I mean, even children, they get, like, have you ever heard about, like, twins in the womb when they have, like, a fist fight? I talk about, like, like, they're actually, I've seen, like, a video of that, like, one is punching, the other one is kicking. So there's probably a degree of anger, and they haven't learned that yet. So no one has taught them to. It's like they're born with that. So that's what I mean. Like, of course, attachment, you're totally right. But innate anger also, you don't need to learn about it. It's no one teaching you that. It's not part of your culture. It's just you have it anyway. And some more and some less. But the potential to get angry is there. So when we say that we are born angry, that of course seems to apply. We're usually angry.
Because we're always attached, right? We're always attached.
Yeah, attachment is much more ever present. I agree with you. So we're much more, So attachment is more pervasive. But because there's attachment, there's innately also... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. All appearances. The mind that realizes emptiness directly is a yogic direct perceiver. Oh yeah, I already said that. So, all intellectually quiet ones. They're doing one session, the intellectually quiet afflictive emotions, afflictive obstructions, ignorance and so forth. Their seeds, they were quiet from contact with false systems, they're all removed, all gone, in one session, so that's great. However, during the path of seeing, practitioners are not merely absorbed in the wisdom that directly realizes emptiness, but they arise from that meditative equipoise to accumulate merit by practicing love, generosity, patience, and so forth. So it's not just that they only practice that, they also need to practice other things, love, etc. Since this path is obtained when practitioners are able to generate the wisdom that is able to see emptiness directly, it is called path of seeing. Okay. And now the next step, which is called the path of meditation, and I guess we can do the Mahayana path tomorrow. Have some time for questions. Yeah, it's not much. So since you've realized emptiness directly now the next, so you can see this progression. First, you wish to be liberated. Then, the only way to be liberated is to eliminate the root that is in the root cause for us not being liberated. And this you can only do when you realize emptiness. But emptiness, realizing emptiness, understanding emptiness, can only be done with a stable mind. So you need to bring in a certain degree of concentration, so the mind can focus on what it has understood with intensity and clarity. But even that is not enough, because the mind is initially conceptual. Now you need a direct realization. That is important. That is the only mind that is powerful enough to cut away at the root of our problems, which is the misperception of reality, with the mind that perceives the opposite of what the ignorance perceives. But now what we're still lacking, after we realize emptiness directly, is familiarity with that mind. When it rises just once, we're not yet habituated to it. No familiarity. Right?
So the garlic is removed, but the smell is still there.
The smell is still there. The smell is still there. In fact, even the garlic, pieces of the garlic are still there. I mean, the intellectually quiet garlic is gone, but the innate garlic is there. Right? Okay? So you still need to... And how can you do that? Because now you've only one time have been able to realize emptiness directly, which the first time you've done that, intellectually is gone automatically. But now it may take some time to be able to go back into it. So again, to be able to get back into it, that may take some time. And then every time you go into it, it becomes stronger. Like anything, the more you do it, although you can generate a certain mind, but you need to develop familiarity. And it becomes deeper and deeper and deeper. That's what you do on the Hinayana path of meditation. Meditation, what does that mean in English? What is the meaning of gom in Tibetan? To familiarize ourselves. So path of meditation means the path where what you developed on the path of seeing, you now meditate on that. That is, you familiarize yourself with that. That's where the word comes from. It's just the name of that path. Of course, you do other things than familiarizing yourself with the direct realization of emptiness, but the name is given mainly with regard to that. Okay? With regard to this practice. So, during the Hinayana path of meditation, it is obtained when practitioners start to familiarize with the Yogic Direct Perceiver that directly realizes emptiness. And in that way, strengthen its ability to now remove the innate afflictive obstructions. Not the inborn ones. And they're much harder to remove. Because the intellectually acquired, you acquired over a few years. The innate ones have been with you since beginning this time. So obviously the innate ones are much harder to remove. Therefore, whenever that Yogic Direct Perceiver in the continuum of practitioners on the path of meditation manifests, so when the practitioner goes into that meditative equipoise, they purify stuff from their mind. It's amazing. They come out and they're different. They removed some layers. But there's so many different layers. So they come out, they engage in other practices, purification, accumulating merit, right? Again, they strengthen the aspiration to become liberated. That also needs to be strengthened. You strengthen that aspiration, you become stronger. The determination, I want to be liberated. That in turn strengthens your realization of emptiness. You go into it and you can dig even deeper. Okay? You come out of it, you're more purified. Your love and compassion are stronger now. Stronger, you're giving. It's more unconditional. Your love is more unconditional. It's all like more and more the kind of giving that you want. So all of this is purified with regard to the method, love, compassion, generosity, as well as your wisdom. So they alternate. You go into the meditative absorption. Only what you do is focus on emptiness. Great. Purify some of the layers of innate obstructions. And that itself then strengthens also love, compassion. Your love is much purer when you come out. And that in turn, again, strengthens the realization of emptiness once you go back into that absorption. Right? Okay, and so in that process, these two are like two wings, like alternate, not the way I described it, not the crooked bird that I described. I don't know, I never thought about what kind of bird is that. Anyway, they still use the wings, that's not my invention. Okay. Anyway, when you do that alternating thing, okay, so then eventually you're able to eliminate all the obscurations and then you enter the Hinayana path of normal learning, okay? So therefore, and the Hinayana path of meditation is obtained when practitioners start to familiarize and now have the ability to remove innate afflictive obstructions. Therefore, whenever that yogic direct perceiver and the continuum of practitioners on the path of meditation manifests, it eliminates one of the different layers of innate ignorance. Other innate afflictions on their seats. So, innate ignorance, the other innate afflictions that ignorance could possibly give rise to. So it's actually, if you eliminate, you see, every time there's anger, it's induced by a certain layer of misperception. If you remove that misperception, of course the anger can no longer arise. So we say it also eliminates the anger, but what it really means, by removing its cause, right? Then you automatically remove it, because it can no longer arise. That which gave rise to it, that degree of self-grasping, that induces a certain type of anger. So the subtler the anger, the subtler the misperception of reality, the subtler the anger and attachment it gives rise to. And in that way, the coarser layers, you eliminate those first. And once they're eliminated, then the coarser types of anger and attachment that they could give rise to, they're no longer there either. Does that make sense? And with that, also no potential for them to rise again, because the root cause is gone. Okay, where did we get to? Different layers of innate ignorance, and their seats, and the potential for them to rise again. When practitioners arise from the yogic direct perceiver, they continue to accumulate merit by deepening their love, compassion, and so forth. Since the Tibetan word for meditation, gom, not if it's without the s in front, it's gom. If it's with the s, it's gom. It's high pitched. Anyway, never mind. It's the only important one. So gom has the connotation of familiarization and habituation. And since practitioners on this level meditate on or familiarize themselves with the direct perception of emptiness, this path is called the path of meditation. Okay? Alright. Okay, great. Well, why am I saying this with the gom? If it doesn't have the S, it's like the passive, like you have been familiarized. If it has the S, it's like the passive, the active act of familiarizing yourself. So this is why, that's what you engage in on that path. Once you're familiarized, that's different, but you have to make an effort here. Sagataka. Sagataka.
Yeah, but the passive one doesn't...
Ganorugoma. Okay, anyway. Great. And then, once the Hinayana path of no more learning then is obtained after the subtlest afflictive obstructions have been removed. So, if you have removed what's in the way, you've removed all the garlic now. The smell is still there, okay, because you've never aimed to become a Buddha, but just the garlic itself, that you've now removed. And with this, that means the subtlest afflictive obstruction. So maybe the subtlest is the smallest pieces of garlic. The coarser ones you've taken out, and then smaller and smaller pieces, subtler and subtler ones. And once they've all been removed, then when you rise from that last meditative absorption, okay, the one that removed the subtlest ones, then you arise as an arhat, as what is called a foe destroyer. What is the foe? The enemy? The misperception of reality. Right? And of course all that which it gives rise to, which are the other afflictions. So you have only the imprints left. Practitioners who reach this path have attained the truth of cessation of afflictive obstructions. They have achieved liberation and nirvana and have become arhats. So nirvana is actually not a restaurant. Kana nirvana. Does anyone? No, they don't no longer have Kana nirvana. I think they closed that. There's a band called Nirvana. Oh, okay. Yeah, I just know the restaurant. Anyway, it was a place called Kana Nirvana. So now they're closed. They're really good. So, but people go like, have achieved Nirvana, go to Nirvana. It sounds like it's a place. Actually, Nirvana is just the cessation of suffering. It's the cessation of the root cause of suffering. So it's just that aspect of mind that previously was affected by the misperception, but is now free from that. So that free state is called nirvana, and the mind is the mind that attained nirvana. So nirvana is a negation, it's a negative. But it's not like emptiness, because in emptiness the object of negation has never existed. With nirvana, it was once there. Right? The ignorance, the misperception was once there. You've now removed it. It was there before, you got rid of it. Emptiness is a negation where the object has never existed. It's not like once things were inherently existent and once you understood they were no longer. It's not like they became non-inherently existent after you understood it. No, you just recognize their actual mode. of existence. I think we can leave it at that. In terms of, we have very little left. The Mahayana path is very similar process, but of course you aim towards enlightenment, and some things need to be added. So we can spend tomorrow morning. I asked Kumbin to give me 3 hours. Sorry. 3 hours in the morning. That's okay? Yeah. Okay, your last 3 hours. So we go through the 5 Mahayana path, and we can actually finish. Now we have time for questions. Okay. Go ahead. I think you were
I
first.
just have a clarification, really.
Okay.
Is the subtle mind and very subtle mind in the dream state samsara?
The very subtle mind in the dream state, it's not a very subtle mind. The very subtle mind, right? I mean, like that the way I described it before, the coarse mind is when we're awake, the subtle mind is when we're asleep, and there are different degrees of that, and the very subtle is the subtle clear light mind of death. And you don't experience that during your sleep. But it's the sleep state, it's the subtle mind, and then within that there are also degrees of subtlety, and it's samsaric.
It is samsara.
Yes, it's always samsaric. Only the very subtle mind is non-samsaric.
Because you were saying it's about the body and the mind being samsara.
Ah, yes. Yes, so in that moment both body and mind are samsaric.
Even the subtle mind, but not the very subtle.
Not the very subtle mind. Then it's only... You have the samsaric imprints on the mind. But the mind itself you wouldn't call samsaric. But because you have the imprints, you're still within samsara. So to that degree, I mean, you would say the mind itself is not in any way afflicted. But because it carries, it's the base for the imprints, and they're still there, so you could say it's still included within samsara. You wouldn't say it's samsara as such, or I'm not sure. It's a good question, actually. No one has asked that.
So it feels so liberating, because here I was talking about like our dreams are crazy and vivid, and like it's completely outside of.
No, but it's within samsara.
But it doesn't feel like it, when I'm dreaming, it doesn't. This isn't real. This isn't real.
Right. Okay. But it's still samsara. That is still influenced by our afflictions and our karma. So whether it's samsara or not is usually seen as the result of our afflictions and karma. So even the subtlest clear light mind holds the imprints, which are the result, the residue from our afflictions. It holds those as a basis. So in that sense, it's samsaric from that point of view. Not from the point of view of its clarity, and etc. From what it perceives, there's no samsaric perception, there's no anger, and so forth. Does that make sense?
Can be, but like...
clear light mind. I'm talking about the clear light mind. During the dreams are not the subtlest mind anyway, and they are very much a result of our afflictions and karma. Even though it's sometimes like, where does that come from? I don't know what you dream yourself to be. Like it's like totally doesn't seem to have any base in reality. But if you start analyzing your dreams, I think sometimes you can find a base in your everyday life, right? There's certain things that we do, and I don't know, it's like kind of, it's crazy, but still it has some connection to our waking life, right?
It's just like this, like, for some reason the dreams in the past, like here, they seem so vivid, and it's like, it feels like at least a kind of partial liberation almost. And when you wake up, I'm like, slowly, like, they kind of sit the delusion, and then you start feeling a bit more kind of
trapped.
Yeah.
But in the dream, we're just as trapped.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, yes?
I'm just reading this book from Tenzin Palmo, and she was talking
from
about...
From who?
Tenzin Palmo.
Tenzin Palmo. Yes.
And she's talking about a Lama, Continuum Rinpoche.
Continuum, her Lama, yes.
That reincarnate the same, reincarnate in 2 kids and 2 babies at the same lifetime.
Reincarnated 2, has 2 reincarnations.
Yeah, there's 2 reincarnations. So just wonder how...
Add some complication. I was going to add that tomorrow to the Mahayana path, that you can... Oh gosh, this is like... Let me talk about it tomorrow. It's so confusing with different emanations. 2 is nothing. So that becomes a little odd. I need to explain a little bit before, because it gets a little confusing. How can someone be more than one person? Okay, we talk about it tomorrow. Okay, all right. What do you want? A question? Oh yeah, I think it was Tim first. Yeah.
Just to 2-point clarification. One, what you talked about emotions, and I'm just curious to know what in Buddhist terms defines an emotion as distinct from a mental factor, I guess, or where emotions sit within these mental factors. And secondly, with regard to joy and other positive emotions, like which I've heard in other traditions, bliss and rapture, even though, because I would imagine you might answer this by saying when you remove all the mental afflictions, well, a natural sort of state of joy. But these sort of shorter-lived and maybe at some level not unskillful, but not sort of equanimous, positive factors. Why are they not part of this Abhidharma kind of? I'm surprised there aren't more kind of positive words like joy or bliss or such like in mental factors, because it seems to me.
All right. Okay. First of all, what is an emotion? What do you think an emotion is? How would you define it?
I wondered if we talked about it in our group a little bit about it being something that was disturbing to the mind. So, because I think it was Amanda said that in some senses the Tibetans don't even acknowledge the emotions. They don't even. I'd heard something like that there's no such thing as an emotion. So I don't know.
There is, but there's no word for it. I mean, now they found a word, because the way we think of emotions in the West, they don't use a word like that, and now they made one word. It's like they put like sonyeong. It's not really traditionally a word, I guess, but like we use emotion in so many ways. Like this person is too emotional, kind of being detached, an emotionally unstable person, or like what does emotion even mean, right? Very hard to define them. I think we all have a hard time defining them. Emotions versus non-emotional states of mind. So
it implies movement, like from the Latin, it's just to move out, isn't it? So that's
movement. All right. So it moves the mind outwards. All right. Yeah. So maybe it becomes visible. Right. In that sense, but of course, not every emotion is visible. It's just the connotation of the word. It's just the etymology of the word. Of course, not every emotion. You can keep your emotions inside and no one will know you have emotions, right? I mean, there are some people, maybe not everyone, but not you. I'm kidding.
Why do you think I asked the question?
No, of course, I'm just kidding. I can sometimes tell from your expressions, and they actually usually reflect everyone else's reflection. So it's been a good way of looking how people feel. No. But of course, we can all to a certain degree keep certain emotions inside. But I guess there are much more. There are states of mind that move us to such a degree they move us to act. I think that has a lot to do with that. So Tibetans would also accept that, except they may not name it that way. And they see it as a necessity. They understand that the Western way of looking at it is helpful, and so they made a word. Right? If they didn't feel that was necessary. For instance, with the word guilt and so forth, they don't use that as often as they have a word for it, but it's not really used. But emotions, as Honus used that word a lot. Chonyeong, even during the teachings. Chonyeong. Chon means feeling, nyong means experience. So it's kind of like it's not really the etymology that you find with the word emotion. That doesn't come across. But they still made a word in conversation with the scientists. So, therefore, what is an emotion? Well, an emotion, first of all, is a mental factor. Emotion would be a mental factor. Now, the way I look at emotions, they're states that wish for something. But maybe that definition of an emotion is too narrow, because joy is not necessarily a wishing mind. It's just an experience of joy. So if you call that an emotion, then my definition is too narrow. Okay, so I'd be happy. I think happy emotion. Yeah, I think maybe you could include that. So then, an emotion maybe something versus like it leads to a reaction versus a rational mind. Like it's like this, it's not like that. That's not an emotion. It may trigger an emotion, but it itself is much more level-headed, like much more balanced. As in, like it doesn't lead to maybe saying something, etc. Whereas an emotion does that. I mean, even a happy emotion leads you to smile, for instance. If you're happy, you smile. When you're sad, when there's sadness, fear is also an emotion, right? Fear is also an emotion. Sadness would be an emotion. Happiness would be an emotion. So it's not just a wishing mind. When we talk about positive, like positive, again, the word means positive as in like I like it positive, or it's beneficial positive. Okay? Accumulating virtue. So a virtuous mind versus a positive mind. Happiness doesn't have to be virtuous. Doesn't need to be virtuous. Can be neutral. Just being happy. So virtuous means it leads to a future experience of happiness. So the happiness that comes with love, that is virtuous. Okay? So therefore, with regard to emotions, yeah, I guess it's not. I don't come up with the definition, but having said what I've just said, maybe we have more of a sense, and we maybe agree on this is an emotion, this is not. A rational kind of mind, a kind of leveled mind, versus a mind that may motion you, that may move you to act in a certain way, to react in a certain way, and that includes virtuous minds, non-virtuous minds, as well as neutral, positive, neutral, negative. Like grief is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, but it's negative, we don't like it. Just a sense of joy that is not associated with love, compassion, or anger or anything. It's neutral, but it's positive. Okay? And also important, so joy is not mentioned. You're right, it's not one of the mental factors, because it's seen as a side effect. Right? It's like when you generate virtuous state of mind, you will be happy. It's a side effect. That's what we wish for and we like it. So what is the tool to be happier? It is to generate love, compassion. Love and compassion are also not mentioned in here, right? But because we talk about them on other occasions. A lot of the virtuous minds, they're kind of left out. Generosity is not mentioned. Miserliness is mentioned, but generosity as one of the virtues, like the mind that wants to give. Patience is not mentioned, is it? Right? Well, it's one of the 6 perfections. Don't need to mention it. Like I said, it's not exclusive. It's like understanding the mind more thoroughly. Since the other ones are discussed in great detail, we're more familiar with them. They're defined, etc. So then there's some that are less defined, but are also important, and then maybe that's why they're mentioned more specifically. Love, compassion, rejoicing in someone's success, patience, effort is mentioned. Yeah, I cannot tell you. Sometimes like a Sangha taught those, and of course he taught them to a specific group of people, his disciples. And maybe they were so familiar with the other ones, those ones that weren't, so he mentioned them.
So it's not sort of laid out as some encyclopedia?
No. Like I said, they're not exclusive.
Okay.
Right? It doesn't mean that those are the only ones there. There are so many more. And it's also mentioned in the text. Those are just some that maybe a Sangha felt they were beneficial at the time, and so he mentioned them. And there are a lot more. And so joy is very important. You see, the thing is, like, Tibetans are very joyful anyway. You don't need to tell the Tibetan it's important to be joyful when you practice. They wouldn't have it any other way, because they are just really joyful. And Tibetans, when they get together, they make music, they're happy. They're always really like joyful. It's like the whole way of being is like when they're together, they want to have joy. That's why when you are with Tibetans, does everyone know what Schadenfreude means?
Yeah.
Schadenfreude. It's actually not a nice word. It's a German word. It means enjoying when someone is harmed. But Tibetans have people think they have a form of that. I can tell you, like when we're like all together, and I trip. One time we were in Bir, we were studying, and we were walking. It was during the monsoon. We were studying the Kagyu tradition as part of our study. We studied the different Tibetan traditions, and we studied at Bir the Kagyu tradition. And we took a walk into town. There was this river. It was really hot, we were like walking, and I was the last, and I fell into the river. They were laughing. Of course, they were also pulling me out, but they were laughing. They thought it was hilarious, And I wanted to save my mobile phone, so my hand was like out of my back because I thought if I get wet, I dry, but my mobile phone would be gone, and those days it was hard to get one. So I was just like there with my back up there, and they thought it was hilarious. It was actually great because I was the only one not hot that day. So it was great. My clothes were wet the whole day and I wasn't hot at all. So actually I enjoyed that. But the point is like in the West, no one would dare to laugh. They were cracking up laughing. Whoa. Yeah. If you're good friends, right? But it depends even if you're not good friends. If someone trips on the road, everyone's laughing. But of course people run towards them and they pick them up. But they if you do something wrong, we would say it's rude in the West, right? Well, our feelings would be hurt. Here you're almost glad, like, oh my God, without any effort you cracked a joke kind of thing. You make everyone laugh. It's almost like you enjoy that, right? It's nice. So they're very joyful people. What I'm trying to say is like they find joy even when you trip, it's like, but in a nice way. Like they still would help you, of course, and run to assist you. The point is they're very jolly people. They love a good laugh. So you don't need to talk about joy. They have it anyway. And so it's very clear, like again and again, don't, like bustobo. They have this word bustobo. Bustobo kind of means being narrow-minded, being closed, feeling kind of like, what's the word for it in English? Like not feeling relaxed, feeling uptight. It has a lot of different meanings. Being narrow-minded, like don't have a narrow-minded view, but also when you feel like you can't laugh, you're so uptight, take things so serious. They always say don't be like that. Be relaxed, be open, be happy, be joyful. So I guess we're taking on something that has been preserved by the Tibetans. I mean, I'm sure there were teachings that slowly were no longer part of Tibetan Buddhism because they weren't so much needed. There was not that much emphasis on it. So joy is less emphasized because they're joyful anyway. It's kind of like you don't need to mention it. It is very important. And then you in Tantra it talks about not just joy but bliss, great bliss, rapture if you like. And that is seen as a very important mind because the greater that rapture, it's a type of rapture, special bliss, the more focused you are. So it's a very powerful focus. You need that bliss to then meditate with it on emptiness. I mean, in fact, the clear light mind of death is a very blissful type of mind. And it's so focused because with this bliss, it's not an excited bliss, it's a very focused bliss. So it is very important. It's mentioned in the tantric texts again and again. In fact, bliss and emptiness, those two together. So I guess it's just not mentioned because everyone knows about them. Okay? Yes.
So Geshema,
sorry, it's just in relation to that?
In relation to emotion.
Sorry, just in relation to that? Can you wait?
In relation to emotion?
Yeah.
In the Tibetan sense, could it just be a stimulus, a response to a stimulus that is perceived?
No, a response to stimuli that is perceived. I mean, that could also be a rational type of mind that is not called... It's I mean, response, you mean like that could potentially give rise to a verbal and physical response? Yes. Well, yeah, maybe you could say that, yes. I don't know how to define that. It's really difficult.
There's no words, so
it's almost like it does something in your... much more. It kind of moves you and like almost like, right? Fear, it kind of moves you.
It's not a verb, but it's like...
It does something
It does something which makes you act.
Yeah, maybe that would be a good way of putting it. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, you.
Sorry if it's a silly question or
no, there are no silly questions. So.
I was wondering about memory. Where would you place memory? And then especially in relation to, let's say, for people who had childhood trauma, and then they forget everything about it, and then one day it pops up in
Very
their
good,
mind.
very good. That's very interesting.
How
does memory
relate to it?
Okay, first of all, memory is possible because of imprints. It's not a silly question at all. Anyway, there are no silly questions, but this one is in fact a very important one. So, imprints. Every experience we have leaves an imprint. And that allows for the potential to remember something, right? I mean, the fact I remember what I did yesterday, although what I did yesterday is no longer there. How come I remember? It's because a residue was left in the mind. And if the right causes and conditions come together, it comes back. But this, what you talked about, suppressed memory, that is very interesting, a very interesting phenomenon, where your own mind, you force yourself to not think about it. It's like you force to such a degree you can actually totally forget. It's fascinating what the mind can do. You can fool yourself to such a degree that it is no longer part of your reality. It's fascinating. But, of course, depending on how unresolved that is, the imprints are still there, and they may still bug you in a certain way. They may still manifest in different ways, which cause you trouble, right? Maybe you have trust issues, or maybe you have, I don't know, certain dreams. I cannot say. So it's just how the mind, it's so interesting, like people who went through a trauma, they just cannot relive this trauma. It's like having experienced it once is so terrible, they just don't want to think about it again, and then repress things in such a way. Where actually it would be much better they lived through it again, because that would be the way to resolve it, but the natural tendency is to push it away. So, yeah, I guess you create another imprint that suppresses that. You create another imprint that now holds the other in its place. I mean, of course, it's all non-physical, and when I say it creates another imprint that helps you, then it seems like there's another imprint pushing it down, which of course can only happen if it was physical. But we can only use physical analogies because that non-physical aspect is difficult. But I think of it as in like you like, I don't want to think about it, you don't want to think about it. That leaves an imprint such that at some point you no longer think about it. To such a degree that then you forget it's never happened to you, or that you ever had the thought, I want to forget about it. And then at some point the circumstances are there, causes and conditions are there, and something triggers that. Maybe it's also a self-preservation of the mind because it bothers you, it affects you, and somehow it's almost like the nature of the mind that sometimes they talk about it as in like the ocean, whatever's in the ocean, eventually it'll come out kind of idea, right? So then in that sense, somehow it'll have to come to the surface. The mind will bring it up. And it's oftentimes causes and conditions that give rise to it, which can be very painful. Maybe the other imprints they wear off that kept it kind of like underneath the surface. I don't know the exact mechanism, but I think it has all to do with these imprints. Does that help a little bit? I've been thinking about this myself actually. I find that very fascinating. And it's not explained in the scripture, so I can only use what has been explained and kind of use common sense to explain that. And I'm not sure. Okay? Yes, I think you were first. You were first, yes.
A bit similar that so in science we call it the subconscious mind.
Subconscious, yeah.
So how can we
access the subconscious mind? Well, first access the conscious mind. I mean, we're not even really aware of the conscious mind, right? So it goes in layers. I think we should first generate introspection and mindfulness. And even if we can't do that in every moment, what we can do is when there are very strong emotions, to retrace them. Find a quiet moment and think, how did I get from A to Z kind of idea? How was that triggered? And when you get to know your coarser minds better, well, then you may notice there are moments in between that you could almost call subconscious. They're maybe just very brief, subtler in the sense that they don't move you to the same degree, and I guess you start noticing them too. It's like, for instance, let's say if you watch something, like you watch a formation of rocks. First you just see the big rocks, right? You just see those. And as you keep looking, you start noticing little details. I think that's the same with mindfulness and introspection. First you just notice the bigger ones, the ones that stay around for longer, that are just more obvious. And as you continue, you just become more aware of even the subtler ones and even the subconscious. And then it's no longer subconscious. You bring them into the conscious.
But in case of suppressed memories, is there any way to,
Well, I guess it's the same. I think people just watching your mind again and again. I meet people. I mean, sometimes it's just about being less busy. It's really funny. I mean, when I remember when I first came to Dharamsala, it's like the way I was raised, there was always something, you had to always work towards something. There was always something new in school, and then when you didn't go to school, I mean, my parents were like, well, now you've got high school, you need to work. Okay, now you need to do, I mean, I was like for a week or so, like lying around, that was fine. But then you had to do something, right? It was all about being something in the world, doing something. I'll tell you a funny story in a moment. Anyway, so I think this is how I was raised. It was always like, be something, be active. Otherwise, you're like worthless almost. So what happens is like, you're always busy. You never look at your own mind. You don't have the time. And when I first came to Dharamsala, I spent about a week or 3 just doing nothing. And sometimes just looking out of the window, and all this stuff came up. That was really fascinating. So just doing nothing sometimes. And like when we go for a vacation, I mean, come on, we're not doing nothing. We're lying at the beach for hours like crazy, you know, front, back. And because we get bored to pieces, we read these novels that keep us busy so we can go do the whole front, back in the ocean, cool down, cream on, front, back. I know that from my own experience, right? Gosh, what I did to my skin. Anyway, and then we were going like, oh, now I'm in Italy, I need to go to Florence. I mean, we're busy. We're very busy on our vacations, right? We called it a vacation, but we can't be with ourselves, really. So first to spend time doing nothing. That is seen as so frivolous, doing nothing. And I'll tell you a funny story. This is seen as good in Tibetan society, monks and nuns doing nothing. But I'm Westerner. Like, I have this... I'm so conditioned. So last year, I came back from Germany, and I was with some nuns, some Tibetan nuns, and we were in a cafe. We were drinking something, and this monk, who I knew from the IBD, he was in the lower class actually. He came, said hi. I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" He's like, "I'm doing well." And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Nothing." And I was like, "Nothing?" And one of the nuns, she kicked me underneath the table, and I was like, "Why? What was going on?" And he was like, all embarrassed because I kind of reacted that way. Instead of saying, "Oh, you do nothing, great, you know, okay, you know, be well, take care." And then the nun said to me, "What did you just do? What did you just do? You told him it was not good to do nothing. It is good to be nothing. You don't always have to do something." Right? And she explained to me, and I was like, "Oh my God, of course you're so right. I'm expecting he's doing something. Like he's doing that. We're always like, we're doing something. And he said, "I'm doing nothing." The thing is, like, sometimes when people meditate, they also don't want to say they meditate, right? You don't say when you meditate. You don't say when you practice. You pretend you're just ordinary. You don't do anything. So there's that aspect. But sometimes you just don't do anything. And that can be very good because that allows for stuff to come up in the mind. So not doing anything. And yeah, even monks and nuns, we should not follow a career of doing this, that, and the other. And I can't help it. I'm conditioned in that way. If I'm like, oh my God, I didn't do anything the whole day, right? But that is actually, many of the meditators up in the mountains, they're not always meditating. Sometimes they're just sitting quietly and looking out, looking at the view. And that brings things up automatically. It makes things come up. That's the first part. And then you do these kind of meditational retreats. Of course, we can't do that. We're so busy, we need the internet at some point, right? Like, gosh, I haven't done... I need to look what's new. I need to whatever. So, but if you let all this go and then start watching your mind on top of that, then things will come up naturally. Because you're looking in the right direction. You cannot suppress something when you look at it. Okay? It'll come up.
Can Tantra be useful?
No, not at this point. No. Tantra is very specific, right? You can leave imprints and all that, you know, but no. How could Tantra be helpful? No. Tantra is just adding stuff. But you first need to get rid of things. Tantra is helpful when you do purification. That is not strictly Tantra. It's taking a technique from Tantra and making it just an ordinary practice. So it is based on some tantric ideas, but I wouldn't call it tantric as such. You don't need an initiation, for instance, to do this practice. So this purification practice, that can bring things up, right? That could be a technique, yeah, but not strictly Tantra. No, I don't think so. I mean, it will happen naturally, but as a beginner, you don't want to start with that. That's not a good method. Okay. Yes. Yes. I'll do a turn. I just want to get some people who haven't said much. Yeah.
Can you talk about the word Rigpa?
Rigpa. Oh, the word Rigpa. Which Rigpa? The Rakiku Rikasa Rik or the Rakiku Rik? There are two spellings in Tibetan. One in English is like R-I-G-S and one is R-I-G. The one with the S, right? The one with the S means reasoning. The one without the S refers to awareness. Yeah, that one, okay. I can only tell you in the Gelugpa tradition. In the Nyingma tradition, for instance, they distinguish between mind, Sem, and knower, Rigpa. But then it means a special kind of mind. It means like, I guess, more the intuitive kind of mind that is not, I don't even know, but that is not affected by all our garbage, basically. Just more of like an innate sense that comes through your practice. But this is in the Nyingma tradition. In the Gelugpa tradition, they don't make that distinction, at least not with that word. They use other words. So in the Tibetan, in the Gelugpa tradition, which is the tradition we follow here mainly, in this tradition, Rigpa just means awareness, consciousness. It's a synonym. Okay, so...
Calm abiding?
No, not just of that sort at all. It's just consciousness and Rigpa are the same. But like I said, in other traditions, it's just how the words are sometimes used slightly differently. So the meaning is that what they talk about in the Nyingma tradition, that is talked about in the Gelugpa tradition as well, but it's just not called a Rigpa. Okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, I'm the wrong person to ask. Like, if you find someone who's well versed in the Nyingma tradition, then they can answer that. You can also Google it. I mean, sometimes you get some answers before you find someone who's better to ask them in person, of course. Yeah. Okay, great. Who hasn't said that much? Pretty equal. Okay. So all four of you get to say something. Bao, you. Okay, I start with another.
Mine is just clarification.
Yeah.
So an arhat is a being who has removed all the afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations. Not
an arhat has only eliminated afflictive obscurations,
Still has to remove.
which is another word for saying obscurations that hinder you from attaining liberation. Yeah, or nirvana. Okay, great. Yes. One more?
So I might be jumping with the bhumis. It's okay if you want to talk about it tomorrow.
Bhumis tomorrow.
But the lower vehicle doesn't
No
have
bhumis.
right?
No bhumis. Okay. Yes.
If you can, I mean, it's a little bit related to her
Emotion?
question about
Memory?
but when we addressed it with respect to the imprints. So I was wondering if you can say a little bit about how the creation of karma, creating of an imprint, the ripening of imprint, what is the process, how it happens? Because I have heard the explanation of the disintegratedness, blah, 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 and it's so complicated that I really want to make my mind around it, and I know it's complicated, probably wouldn't want to talk about it, but I was just checking if there is a possibility. It's not, I mean, I can ask you another time.
Yeah, I'll ask you, because I'm opening some box here that is like, oh my god. Right, if I have time tomorrow, this is Prasangika, and it's a little hard to understand.
Yeah, because I mean, we studied it, and I read it, and still, like, when I think about it, I really can't explain it to myself, so I was wondering if I can hear your perspective.
Yes, my perspective on it. Yep, I don't think I want to do that now, so maybe if it's tomorrow there's time, we can come to it, yeah.
Another time I'll ask.
Yeah,
So, two questions. I've been searching for Buddhist perspective on something. So one of the starting points in Buddhist worldview is that it takes reality as given, and then you should want to know the ultimate nature of reality. But a question that is a prior question comes before this is a fundamental metaphysical question, which is, why does the reality exist in the first place? In other words, as many philosophers have formulated it in this way, why is there something rather than nothing?
Mm-hmm.
Because the existence of reality is, as I once mentioned to you, the existence of reality is a contingent phenomenon as against a necessary phenomenon. In other words, reality could as well have not existed, and yet here it is. Why? So that's the first question. The second is regarding the first primary affliction, namely attachment. Now there are different strands in the topic of attachment. There is exaggeration, there is superimposing positive qualities and so on. But I would like to pick two strands. One is suffering and the other is impermanence of the object that we could be attached to.
Okay, suffering and impermanence of the object, okay?
Now, first of all, there doesn't seem to be a necessary connection in philosophical sense between suffering and impermanence. So if we take suffering in and of itself, and impermanence of the object in and of itself, there doesn't seem to be a necessary connection. But still,
how does that connect to attachment, though? I get what is the connection between the two, but how do you connect this to attachment?
Because the impermanence of phenomenon inevitably leads to suffering. But then this connection
inevitably
leads to suffering. But this connection comes from our faulty way of handling our experiences and dealing with this. But anyway, attachment inevitably leads to suffering. The point is that the best solution to this problem seems to be that we should, and I would like to get your thoughts on this, we should probably develop the ability to deal with this inevitable suffering rather than throwing away attachment.
Okay, alright, I get it. Okay. Now, to the first question. Why is reality there? Basically, why is it all like that? I don't have an answer to that. I don't think anyone has. It just is, right? It just is. And what could be the answer to that, even if hypothetically there was one? Because God came up with it and thought, that'll be nice to make that reality. I mean, I wouldn't, even if hypothetically there were an answer to that, that wouldn't even make sense. So I think there's unfortunately no answer to that question. I mean, that is like, why am I here? Why do I have a mind? No, I don't know. We just do. So, you see, in Buddhism, and where does it come from, etc. In Buddhism, there's a story that is told. If we ask these questions too much, that would be like someone gets shot with an arrow, right? Someone shoots us with an arrow, and instead of pulling it out, we ask, who made the arrow? Why is it here? Why does it exist in the first place? How long it is? How short it is, right? It's like, you suffer. Pull out the arrow and don't worry about where it comes from, right? So I'm not saying we shouldn't ask these questions. It is good. It's important to ask these questions. But at some point, if it becomes like we can't move on because we have so many of these questions, maybe just leaving them for now. And maybe once we become enlightened, we'll have an answer. Most important is to relieve ourselves from suffering now, right? So the story with the arrow is pretty funny, but in a way it's like, come on, well, let's recognize the way you said, you recognize that attachment leads to suffering, etc. So let's remove that, which takes me to the next question. Why not remove suffering? Why remove attachment? Well, if attachment is the cause of suffering, right? It's a bit like if you have the symptom and the cause of a disease, removing the symptoms, we all know it, that can help to a certain degree, but it doesn't help to remove the suffering for good. It'll arise again because you haven't dealt with the cause yet. And attachment, you never deal with attachment so much as with the ignorance, the misperception of reality that gives rise to the attachment. You can temporarily remove attachment when it becomes too big, because then the suffering is too big. So how do you remove the suffering? We cannot stop other people from harming us. But if we remove our reaction, I mean, we can stop in the sense of we don't create the karma any longer. But let's say we're still within samsara, and it's like Shantideva says, you can't put leather, you can't cover the entire earth with leather, which is like stopping everyone from harming you. But you can put leather underneath your feet, and in that way, it has the same effect. So if you yourself are no longer harmed because there's no longer attachment to, how dare to me, etc., then I don't take it personally, and then I don't see it as a personal offense or something. It's just an affliction that the other person has, and because of my karma, I've created the causes to experience this. Then it's no longer suffering. So I deal with the attachment. Now, with regard to your question of attachment and impermanence and suffering, those three, what I think you're saying, well, of course, there's nothing wrong with impermanence. There's nothing wrong with impermanence. We don't blame impermanence. The suffering of change, we're not saying, well, change is the problem. In fact, it's not always that change doesn't always lead to suffering. If I have a headache, I'm really grateful to some change when my headache stops. But, of course, in general, our mind, the attached mind, has this tendency to attach to something, holding on to something. That is actually pretty ridiculous, because what we're holding on to, it's like holding on to quicksand. You can never really grasp it. But the mind is under the illusion that there is something to hold on to, which means something lasting. And that's where also our suffering comes from, that misperception that there's really nothing solid there, because everything is ever changing. The other person's mind is changing, the other person's body is changing. So what we're holding on to doesn't exist. And that's where the disappointment comes in, when we expect things to remain the same. We wish them to remain the same. When we're in a relationship, for instance, in the beginning the person was really nice. Now they're not that nice, right? And we're like, why are they not treating me the way that... It's impermanence. Of course, they move on, it changes. So Dharamsala has changed. When I first came here, it was very different, much more peaceful. So I may think, oh my God, Dharamsala has changed. But it has its advantages the way it is now. Disadvantages, advantages, like anything. So therefore, it's our grasping onto permanence that is the problem. And that comes, it's first misperception of reality, that gives rise to a sense of solidity and permanence, and then the mind holds on to it. So again, it's the wrong views. We need to remove the wrong view with regard to inherent existence that will naturally let go of our inability to perceive impermanence, and then therefore the mind will try to hold on to things because those misperceptions are no longer there. So it comes down to, let's not work with the symptoms, let's work with the origin or with the root cause. Does that help? Okay, great. Please.
You.
No, you.
Okay. So it's like a two-question mind. In case of some kind of situation, like in some kind of conversation or something happen outside, the emotions is arising.
Okay, when some I'll repeat the question just because he's in the front, you may not hear it.
So, for me, for example, I'm not really able to adjust which level I need to keep those emotions. Not to suppress, but also not to give unnecessary reaction. So I'm not really
able to balance.
Adjust that level. If I suppress, if I disappearing, it is wrong, I think. If it is becoming a physical reaction, then it is too much, I think. If you have some kind of answer for it, it's okay.
Very important question. Okay,
the next one is, when I'm dealing with that kind of emotions without giving the reaction, is there any practical technique to not affecting my mood and continue with the clear mind?
Wow, that's so interesting. His question is like, with certain emotions, it's so difficult to deal with them, like to not suppress them, but not to allow them to run wild either. So that middle way that you can actually stop them. Okay. And then also, certain emotions lead to certain moods. That is really interesting, like how we can actually, because of a certain emotion, that puts us into a mood. So we wake up with a bad mood. Don't worry about the good mood, but the bad mood, right? That's the one to really look out for, because you can feel miserable the whole day. It's a slow process. It's a pretty slow process. Of course, it's not immediate, but we need to start somewhere. So with these emotions, like oftentimes an emotion starts with a tiny emotion, right? It's not, it doesn't go from 0 to 100. It's like they build up. And we are very often not aware of that build up. So I would recommend, in the case of a strong emotion, when you find yourself having that strong emotion, right? Okay, so what could help in that moment when you have the emotion is to watch it. To pay attention to the emotion. By definition, the emotion cannot remain as strongly as it was before, because now you're watching it. You're no longer paying attention to the object of the emotion that allows that to continue on, but you're paying attention to the emotion itself. and you're not emotional with the emotion itself, so the emotion will naturally subside.
Sometimes taking time.
Sometimes taking time, all right, because the emotion wants to get through. Those two are now in a argument, like, no, let me be emotional. No, I want to watch you. No, I want to be right. So the one that watches the mind, you need to just very gently. It's like with the breathing, just bring it back to the emotion, bring it back to that. Just allow it, breathe deeply. Sometimes just going through the motion of like as if you were calm, breathe calmly. Maybe you want to think of something else. Think of a beautiful flower that makes you calm. If the emotion doesn't make you, just kind of force it. And then when you kind of find a little bit of a distance, you can think of something else. In that moment, the emotion loses its momentum. And then start watching it, right? Try to watch it. That's one way. And once the emotion is calmed down, now you go back, you think, how did I get to this very strong emotion from what triggered it? What triggered the emotion, right? Usually it's someone saying something or something happening, right? Okay, now you go back to that moment when the emotion started. And think, how did I get from there to this strong emotion? Now, if I could step in, if I could actually do it, what would I do? Can you give me an example of something? Like, give me just an example.
Okay, hypothetically, like you are in the taxi driver said something, it's annoyed you so much, and you want to hurt him on the...
Okay, taxi driver, he says, 50 rupees.
Yeah, something like that.
Right? You made the deal, you haggled with him, you dealt with him, it was all okay. And when you arrive, he says 100 rupees. Yeah. Right? And you're like, okay. I totally get that. Okay. So you know what triggered that. It triggered this moment when he said 100 rupees. Okay. Now, just if you had time to stop the movie of that situation. Like, let's say you could stop it in time. Okay. Taxi driver, everyone freezes in time. And you can sit back now. You can go back in time, you rewind, and you go to that moment when they say 100 rupees. And you could just think, well, okay, even if they say so, you can just give them 50 rupee and walk away. Usually the taxi drivers, they remember, they know they're wrong, and what are they going to do if you give them 50 rupees? And, what are they going to do? They're not going to hold you. And if someone else is, they can't do anything. So why get angry? You give them 50 rupees, and then think, honestly, put yourself into the shoe of the taxi driver. Around here, there's so many taxis. And most of the time you're in a traffic jam. You spend the hours and hours in a traffic jam, then oftentimes the people that drive with you, they get frustrated. They just leave the car. You can't get out of the car. They take off. They may pay, they may not pay. They may not pay the full price. You're stuck in there. You have to pay for your family. You're responsible for your entire family. Oftentimes, it's traditional in India. Your wife stays with the kids go to school. You may look after your elderly grandparents who can no longer work. They make do with very little money. It's amazing how little money they make do. In India, when the bucket breaks, you don't throw it away, you fix it. Try to fix a water bucket. That's not easy, They fix everything because they don't waste money. Why? Because they cannot. They have so little money. And so really, when you look at our style of life, we can easily splash 100 rupees. 100 rupees, let's have 3 cups of coffees. Never mind, it's nothing. For us, it's not that much. For them, it's a lot of money. And so really, when you put yourself into their shoes, I once asked an Indian driver, I think it was, where does that come from? That whole tradition of cheating. He said, what else are we going to do? It's like the government doesn't pay us much, cannot pay us much. We don't get paid much. It's just a country with very few opportunities, like job opportunities. And so sometimes cheating is the only way, and it's considered to be stupid not to do it. Right? And it's not seen as that serious. It's not a personal, you just cheat a little bit. It's not like you hurt someone deeply. Everyone knows about it. So we just take it very personally. But in the end, I get it. And no one can force you to give them money. So if you really think about all this, right? I'm reaching out here a little bit, 7 minutes, just putting yourself into the taxi driver's shoe. But really, think what kind of life they live. And then in the end, you can just crack a joke. Really, they have a really good sense of humor. If you say, oh, right? Like, whoops, what are you saying, right? It's really, I mean, Indians, it's so sweet. Like, you can always joke with them. Like, they're right away, usually they're, it's like in a certain way, don't make fun of them. But these drivers, you can easily say, like when I say come in half an hour, I'm like, is it Indian half an hour? Or is it really half an hour? And they laugh, like, so to kind of be friendly and lighthearted, then they usually don't do that anyway, right? And you kind of say, Baya, is it really? We said 50, right? You remember? And then they usually go, oh, yeah, right? So if you have this friendliness with them, really, there's a way of just being friendly, and they're friendly back. So there's no need. And it just gives you a headache, etc. So if you talk with them friendly and you're nice and you ask, about the kids and their wife, etc. Oh, well, maybe not their wife, but I can do that. I ask about their wives and like, what is their favorite food sometimes, and their kids, how many kids they have, which village they're from. They're really friendly. Most of them are really friendly. And then they don't do that.
It was not a real example.
That wasn't the example?
No, it wasn't a real example. I just said that.
Oh, you made it up. Well, you can apply it to anyone, right?
But it is useful for anyone.
It was useful, right? Just be friendly with them, right? I mean, even as a woman, you can be. You don't flirt, of course, but you're kind of like in a very nice and sisterly kind of way, or in your case, brotherly way. And everyone responds to that, right? The shopkeepers, hey, like friendly. And then they don't cheat you. And if you say, like, really? Come on, what's the real price? Local price or something. Right? Yeah. And then even if you get cheated, how much is that? And in the end, you maybe make a difference in terms of what they can give their kids. I mean, we have a guy who charges money for the water. It's incredible, from the nunnery. He charges water. And he made me so angry. And one day he was there, and when he was sitting there, I asked him about his kids. And he's actually getting his daughter through medical school. Okay, fine. He's giving his daughter a really good education. No, it doesn't bother me any longer. Because I think, okay, the money, at least it goes to the education of his daughter. Right? It put things into perspective.
But most of the ego is arising. Actually.
Of course the ego is there, but my ego is there too. How dare I don't... I'm thinking he can't have an ego. I got my own ego, but at least I have the Dharma, and I've learned how this is harmful. In his case, he hasn't learned that. That's the way he gets his family through. Right? And people are here very dedicated to their family. It's amazing how they take responsibility. And they don't easily walk away. It's very rare for someone to walk away. They work so hard. Unbelievable. I mean, these shopkeepers, they're there every day. They don't take a vacation like us, 3 weeks to Goa. I don't think they've ever left their store. I mean, Sundays, Mondays, they're always there. They work so hard. Right? Their life is like just, that's it. And so, cheat a little bit. Right? I mean, just putting it in perspective. And they're really, really nice people underneath it. Very easily you can talk with them. Sorry, that was a little bit extensive. 10 minutes on just that. Sorry. Okay. All right, let's leave it at that. We continue tomorrow. Okay.